U.S. Ambassador to Sierra Leone, Bryan Hunt. The ambassador is here to talk about, of course, the re-election of the U.S. President, Donald Trump, and his policies, the fate of the MCC for Sierra Leone, as well as the future of other developments in Sierra Leone by the U.S. United States. And similarly to Sierra Leone, U.S. partnership and visa restriction on Sierra Leone, among other things. Good morning, Ambassador. It's always a pleasure having you in our studios.
Good morning. It's always a pleasure to join you on Wake Up Sierra Leone.
A well-packed intro there, a number of issues to be talked about, one of which has to do with, of course, the re-election of Donald Trump, his policies, U.S.-Sierra Leone partnership, and of course, most importantly, the most recent of reports that was out on social media, which speaks to possible visa restriction to Sierra Leone. Will you first off confirm the recent release, which talks about a list of about 43 countries that are proposed for possible U.S. visa restriction or travel ban for those countries?
Sure. Social media obviously picks up lots of stories from lots of different places. What I can say definitively is that at this time there is no visa ban in place for Sierra Leone or for any other country. I have no instructions from Washington to impose such a ban. President Trump did issue an executive order asking the Department of State and our counterparts at the Department of Homeland Security to look at how we can better secure America's borders, make sure that our visa processes are not in any way contributing to illegal immigration. That report that we have to produce for the president is very much under discussion within the State Department, but it is right now in a deliberative process. As part of our deliberative process in the United States, we encourage open discussion, we encourage open debate, we encourage free flow of ideas. But what I can say is that no decisions have been made. The lists that appeared in the New York Times and in Reuters, you will have seen, already had different information in them, which illustrates that no decisions have been made. We do have a serious problem, however, in Sierra Leone with individuals choosing to misuse their U.S. visas. About 15% of those who receive tourist and business visas overstay, remain in the United States illegally. About 35% of those who receive student visas remain in the United States illegally. That has to change. We cannot continue to see people misusing their visas when they go to the United States, in the same way that your country expects United States citizens who come to Sierra Leone to respect the conditions of their visas. So as the foreign minister mentioned the other day during one of his interviews, if we do not see changes in the use of Sierra Leone visas and ensure that people begin to use those visas appropriately, we will need to consider exactly what we're going to do to try to ensure that Sierra Leoneans don't remain illegally in the United States.
Which makes very clear that the statistics you mentioned, about 15%, makes very clear that there seems to be a problem, and peradventure the statements or the issue mentioned in those posts were to some extent true.
So I think it's true that there is a problem. I think it's true that we are considering various options as to how one might resolve that problem. But as I said before, at this time, no decision has been made about imposing any restrictions on Sierra Leoneans' ability to apply for or use a visa to go to the United States. Should we make any policy determinations, those would of course be communicated from the embassy to the government of Sierra Leone as well as to the public, and that should be the definitive source of information that people look towards if they're interested in this topic. But the reality is right now you can apply for a visa, you can be granted a visa, you may travel on your visa.
Essentially, overstay on visas could be one amongst the many problems that the U.S. Embassy in Sierra Leone is currently confronted with. But again, are there other relevant issues? Because there are speculations that Sierra Leone seems to have owed, of course, a U.S. business company which has painted a very negative picture, which is about 8 million to Jenny and Block, an American farm, which seem very much worrying, and speculations are that it could also be another reason why a ban could be placed on Sierra Leone, more so in terms of visas.
So the only criteria that we've been instructed to look at by President Trump is around the security of the visa system itself. Extraneous political issues are not part of the current review that is ongoing with the Department of State and other agencies in the U.S. government. So what we have been tasked in the executive order to look at very specifically are the ways in which we issue visas, the ways in which visas are being used, the security of documents that go into the visa process, that set of issues. And the executive order is on the White House website for anyone who wants to read precisely what the president has tasked us to look at.
Is the U.S. still pleased with doing business in Sierra Leone?
Yes, very much so. We have a number of U.S. companies that are invested in Sierra Leone that are making a considerable profit here, that are employing American citizens, that are employing Sierra Leonean citizens, that form an important part of your tax base here in Sierra Leone. So we enthusiastically encourage U.S. companies to look at doing business in Sierra Leone. There are challenges, as there are in any country. There are improvements that could be made to the business climate here, but overall, we remain enthusiastically supportive of anything that increases mutual economic prosperity for the United States and Sierra Leone.
Ambassador Hunt, is the U.S. Embassy, or is the U.S. generally concerned over recent news on social media, over recent news on international media, and even within Sierra Leone with regards the drug lord who reports say is in Sierra Leone? Is the U.S. concerned?
Certainly we're concerned about the entire question of synthetic drugs and traditional drugs globally. We obviously had a very robust discussion with your government around the Kush national epidemic and how we could support in trying to control the importation of the precursor drugs, the nitazines that go into producing that particular brand of narcotic. The recent reports of cocaine trafficking, and I saw recently the French seized a large quantity of cocaine off the coast of West Africa, is certainly concerning. It is not a new trend that we have cocaine moving through West Africa. It's one that we have monitored for a long time through our Drug Enforcement Administration, one that we continue to speak with governments about, one that we continue to work with our European partners to try to control. Certainly anytime we see cocaine or other drugs moving through a country, it raises questions about exactly which cartels are involved. It raises questions about whether those same cartels are dealing drugs in the United States. It raises questions about financial flows. All of this, of course, we take up in law enforcement channels with your government, and we continue to work very closely with them to try to make sure that Sierra Leone's territory is as immune as it can be from these serious trafficking problems.
There has been back and forth with regards Yos Laidekas, stroke Omar Sharif's whereabouts. But aside from that, there are also, of course, there are also troubling issues between Sierra Leone and Guinea, more so when a vehicle with the embassy's plates was also caught with substance suspected to be cocaine. How troubling is the current situation as we speak, and what's the U.S. advice to Sierra Leone, more so in terms of handling all of these issues?
So I don't want to get into the specifics of cases that are under investigation by your law enforcement agencies. I don't want to do anything that would compromise those investigations in a judicial case. What I'll say in general is that every government has challenges in controlling what its employees may or may not do. We have had instances where we have had to arrest and charge official Americans who have misuse their diplomatic privileges to transit drugs into our own country throughout the course of our history. It's sad that this happens. It's sad that Sierra Leone is facing some of the same challenges, apparently, in that regard. I think it is good news that the Sierra Leonean authorities have reacted, that there are these ongoing criminal investigations that will ultimately, I assume, lead towards prosecutions and convictions. I don't really have great advice to offer on this score other than vigilance, which is what we practice in the United States, making sure that there are checks and balances and oversight to ensure that people don't misuse their diplomatic privileges to engage in illegal activities. But it would be naive of me to suggest that there is some magic formula that could prevent this. We have difficulties preventing this in our own country.
And then again, back to the supposed visa restriction. Is it a problem of governments or is it individual?
So the crux of the issues that we are most concerned about are the overstay rates, and those are decisions that are made by individuals. Now, government can certainly do things like the foreign minister did the other day very positively in encouraging Sierra Leoneans to adhere to the laws of the United States when they choose to travel there. But I think it's incumbent upon all Sierra Leoneans to really talk with their friends, their family members, their colleagues who are traveling to the United States and encourage them to adhere to the laws that are in place in the United States. Because if people choose not to do that, as we've already seen, it makes it much more difficult for us to issue visas to other Sierra Leoneans. It makes travel much more difficult. It results in increased scrutiny when people arrive at the airport. So I think individual actions do have repercussions on the wider society in this case.
As we talk of traveling, the first thing that came to mind is diversity lottery. What's the current state of same?
Of
the diversity lottery?
Oh, the visa lottery. Yeah, the visa lottery is still part of U.S. law. It happens every year. There are still people who are selected and are able then to apply through that particular mechanism. At this time, there's no proposed changes that I'm aware of within our Congress, because that is legislative to change that program.
Let's talk on the MCC. Currently, the country is challenged in terms of its power supply to the people, and I think this was one among the many reasons that the U.S. government, foreseen and decided to see ways on it to support the country's energy infrastructure. What's the current state? Because many questions people are asking is, with the coming of Donald Trump, are we going to see a halt of that support to Sierra Leone?
People like to speculate on a number of things. What I can tell you is that the compact was signed. The compact remains in place. We have not pulled out of the compact. We have not taken the steps that would be necessary to pull out of the compact. So I think at this stage we fully anticipate moving forward so long as Sierra Leone's government meets the preconditions that are laid out in the compact.
So where are we in terms of the implementation?
So the MCC compact, as you know, was always designed to be a long-term investment. Mm-hmm. The first several years of any MCC compact are spent in program design, making sure all of the engineering records are appropriately done, setting up the various institutions that will administer the compact. So we're still in that pre-implementation phase here in Sierra Leone. I would anticipate that phase will go probably for another 12 to 18 months. The government will meet its entry into force conditions, and then we would be able to actually break ground on the building, which is a 5-year fixed timeline. And that's why we do all of the work up front in the design phase, so that we can meet that 5-year construction timeline. This is very challenging engineering work that's being proposed to build a transmission and distribution line through what is essentially swamp in southern Sierra Leone. It's a greenfield investment, so it probably will take every day of those 5 years to be able to do the construction.
Essentially, on record to have mentioned that the implementation of the MCC is contingent on key recommendations in the tripartite report. So far, so good. Is the U.S. government pleased with the manner at which those recommendations are being heeded to?
Well, we're certainly seeing progress. I think it is a very good sign that the steering committee is meeting now. It is a good sign that they are working in the Attorney General's office on draft legislation. I think it's a very good sign that we are beginning to see some of the electoral management bodies putting in place their own plans to meet the regulatory reforms recommended by the Tripartite Commission. This is a process we never expected to be concluded in 3 months or 6 months. This is going to take some time to get all of the legislative and regulatory changes in place. And certainly we're continuing to monitor that very closely and work with others in the diplomatic community to ensure that progress continues to be made. I think it is a good sign as well that in addition to focusing on the tripartite recommendations, there's been progress in other parts of the Agreement for National Unity recently, particularly with the release of detainees, which has been something I know that the opposition has been clamoring for some time. So I think the government and the opposition both remain committed to moving this process forward, and we look forward to continuing to engage with them as we achieve the necessary results.
The reason for that question is, as we speak, the opposition seem the opposition seem to have raised a lot of questions about the constitution of the body that is, of course, looking at the recommendations and series to ensure most of the issues that are mentioned are being resolved. Has seemed to reach the doors of the embassy.
The opposition's job in any democracy is to hold the government accountable, and I'm very happy that the APC takes that job seriously, and they continue to ask very pertinent questions about the process. They continue to put pressure on the government to advance the implementation process. They continue to insist that they have a voice in that implementation process. All of that is very, very appropriate. Certainly from the international perspective, we appreciate the APC's ongoing engagement. I hope the government also recognizes the value of that engagement from the APC. At the end of the day, much of this legislation has to go through Parliament. Some of it requires 2/3 in order to pass. So having the APC as a partner in this process is absolutely critical for success.
At some point you mentioned the February executive order of President Trump, which from reports, I think just one Sierra Leonean has been deported, whom from according to the report he has been there for something like 21 years or so to speak. I might be right. Is that order affecting Sierra Leone? I mean, deportation order, will it affect Sierra Leone?
So most assuredly it will. We have a number of Sierra Leonean citizens who have remained in the United States illegally. President Trump has been very clear to our Department of Homeland Security that they are to remove all illegal aliens from our country. They are to return them to their home country. It's more than one. There are a handful of Sierra Leoneans who are already subject to final deportation orders from the United States. Some of those have already returned to the country. Others will be returning shortly to the country. But I would expect this will be an ongoing process. The way that our system works, because we are an open society, there is not a specific list of targeted individuals. We don't know exactly where everyone is. So for our law enforcement agencies, particularly my colleagues in the Department of Homeland Security, this is going to be a multi-year effort to make sure that the president's vision of a United States that is composed only of people who are there legally is implemented.
Is it depicting the why he's saying that America is for Americans?
No, we have always welcomed legal immigrants to our shores. Those who come to the United States and adhere to our laws, use their visas appropriately, whether they are immigrant or non-immigrant visas, are very, very welcome, and they form a very important part of our society. Many of our industries rely upon the ability to attract talent globally. Our advantage in science and research that we've enjoyed for a long time is because we are able to bring the best and the brightest minds from around the globe to work in U.S. industry and at U.S. centers of higher education. That will continue. But what we insist upon is that everyone who comes through the legal process, and that when they arrive in the United States, they adhere to our laws. Those who choose not to adhere to the rule of law are simply not going to continue to be welcomed into our society.
Ambassador Hunt, we've had a barrage of messages on our Facebook page. Let's see ways to ensure, of course, we usher in our viewers who following us from across the globe. First is from Mystic Doazaku, says, good to hear from your studio guests, Mr. Ambassador. Many Sierra Leoneans are with the fervent belief that the excesses by the USA are too much, especially the recent restriction on visa for Sierra Leoneans. Mystic also says, indeed, misusing a diplomatic status is an unprofessional act because a diplomat should maintain integrity. As for the visa restriction, the current U.S. administration should rethink and do the needful on the visa restriction process. Sussman says Donald Trump is right. America is for Americans. Africa is for Africans. If we don't stop to depend on these white men, they will never stop to disrespect us for quite so long. America is creating visa restrictions and all kind of disrespect to Sierra Leoneans just for our leaders to better prepare themselves to plan Sierra Leone for the benefit of all Sierra Leoneans. But our leaders are pretending as if they are not concerned, which is bad. If we have integrity as Sierra Leoneans, we will not allow Americans to disrespect us. Disrespect us for not living in America while they are living in Sierra Leone as much as they can. It's now time our leaders know that their responsibility is to focus on the development of Sierra Leone. What I want to ask the ambassador is, if he had a data on how many American citizens are living in Sierra Leone, then we'll begin to check if they all have legal residence permits. Leaders in Sierra Leone are really chipping themselves to these white men. Okay. Abubakar Siddiq says, let's agree that America is for Americans and Europe is for Europeans, and we should request them to deport youth. Okay, that's why it's so clear. Gaspini says, the internet has made it possible for us to see what is happening in the world right now. The ambassador should be honest to tell that the Sierra Leone government will not receive the MCC compact under this Trump administration. James Bana Kagbo says, very interesting interview, very good question from the presenter. Thank you. Eddie Grant says, ambassador is very professional. Abubakar Siddiq Darami says, also a very good professional response from the ambassador. Okay. Philip Sombo is asking, what about the diversity program? Mosdi says, I'm loving the line of question from Samuel. Hopefully the ambassador response will put some of the fake news on rest. Mosdi says, however, the ambassador response will still find ways to make up. Okay. Usman Prince Suleiman Kavoni says, the United States has the technology to remove all person who violated the visa rule rather than punishing the government for something they do not have control over. Usman also says, what prompted the proposed visa ban and restriction? Many questions, too many questions. Edward Peacock says, what happened to individuals who already have visas? Are they also restricted from traveling? Many questions. Eddie Grant says a very professional and diplomatic ambassador, explicit explanation in very simple English. Had it been our own ambassador speaking, come here, baby grammars and all the rest. We'll take these messages for now, and you respond as we go along. We'll have to take some other messages.
Yeah, no, of course. I'll just say, I want to be very clear, because there still seems to be some confusion in the questions. There is no visa ban. There is no restriction on use of visas by Sierra Leoneans or any other nationality to travel to the United States. There is no restriction on issuance of visas to Sierra Leoneans, nor is there any policy decision from the United States that we're going to restrict the use of visas by Sierra Leoneans. So let me be crystal clear about that. There is a deliberative process that is going on that is looking at various ways that the United States might better secure our visa system. But there has been no decision at all that we are imposing a visa ban on Sierra Leone or any other country.
Ambassador, of recent, we've also seen the fact that the U.S. has decided to take the backseat in terms of their support to many programs that we are all aimed at supporting not just Africa, but other parts of the globe. What sort of an effect is it having on, say, development in Sierra Leone?
So in Sierra Leone, well, let me start with the global picture. I think the global news media has made a great deal over President Trump's decision to look at how we can more effectively manage our foreign assistance. The Secretary of State has been crystal clear that the United States will remain a major source of foreign assistance globally. He has been very clear that we remain deeply concerned about the humanitarian crises around the world, and we are not backing away from the idea that there is value in continuing to provide support to people around the globe who badly need it. The question that the Secretary, the President, others in the administration have asked, and it's a very legitimate one that gets asked by every new administration, is one, does our foreign assistance support our foreign policy, which is critical because the two should move in tandem. Secondly, is the burden shared equitably between the United States and other countries around the globe? And it should be. And third, are our programs actually achieving the targets that they're set out to achieve? Are we getting the assistance to the people who most need it? Or is that assistance being used primarily to support bureaucratic institutions that don't necessarily get support to the people? Now, President Trump has taken some fairly dramatic actions as part of his review. He is determined that we do better. He believes we can do better. He believes that we should challenge ourselves to do better. The review is still in progress. The Office of Management and Budget has been charged to look at this not just for USAID and the State Department, but across the U.S. government. They are doing that. There will likely be changes in the way we administer assistance. But I come back to the Secretary's strong statements and repeated statements that we will continue to be a significant player in this space globally. As far as Sierra Leone goes, USAID is a relatively small part of our foreign assistance portfolio here in Sierra Leone. MCC, the Development Finance Corporation, the work that is done by CDC are also critically important parts of our program. So on the USAID side, what I can say is that we have conducted a review of all of the activities here. We have received guidance from Washington, from the Secretary, as to which activities he wants to continue. Not surprisingly, those activities are some of our largest ones that focus on improving health care here in Sierra Leone. So we will continue, as we have been in the past, to be a significant contributor to the eradication of malaria, to supporting maternal and child health, to working to ensure that pandemic disease does not impact Sierra Leone or the rest of the globe. So those programs, which constitute the vast majority of our USAID assistance, have been approved to move forward. We have people in the field right now who are working to implement those. Those projects will continue. So I don't anticipate that there's going to be significant and visible changes here in Sierra Leone. There are other countries where it's a very different situation because they have a different mix of programming, different mix of institutions, and far deeper problems in how our foreign assistance has been administered there. But here in Sierra Leone, we already had a very finite set of activities we were working on. Those were already targeted in a way that was mutually beneficial to both countries.
Because essentially, I was just going through the news in South Africa, wherein as a result of the cuts on USAID support to, say, particularly to HIV/AIDS program, about 900,000 people in South Africa are set to, of course, faced with several health challenges because of these cuts. Yeah. And I was just thinking of same in Sierra Leone.
Yeah, so in Sierra Leone, the HIV/AIDS program is not administered by USAID. Okay. It is administered through our Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. That program is ongoing. That program has been approved to continue, so we do not anticipate any changes to our support for HIV/AIDS here in Sierra Leone. South Africa is a different situation. As you will have seen in the news media, we have a number of diplomatic challenges with South Africa right now, not necessarily related even to foreign assistance policy, but broader differences of opinion over certain international issues that are preventing us from being able to continue the normal assistance we would provide to that country.
Essentially, America, men will say, is not tolerant with terrorists, or so to speak. America has very stiff laws that has to do with terrorism and amongst other things. But again, let's say for citizens who are not criminal, having good records, they've been very protective of the laws of America, and say peradventure they stay in America without the required documentation, are they prone to be deported?
Oh, absolutely. Anyone who is in the United States without the appropriate documentation is always subject to deportation. Now, we have limited resources, and of course, the top priority are those that pose an immediate threat to our security, but that should not be interpreted as it's okay for others to violate the law and remain. The reality is that President Trump has been crystal clear that anyone who is in the United States without the appropriate documentation is subject to deportation and should be deported. It is a basic question for us of the application of the rule of law. In the same way that any U.S. citizen that is here in Sierra Leone without the appropriate documentation is subject to deportation, any Sierra Leonean in the United States who is there without appropriate documentation is subject to deportation.
Someone asked earlier on as to the number of Americans living in Sierra Leone.
So the United States does not keep track of numbers of citizens that live abroad. We have voluntary registration, so I could not give anyone a definitive figure of number of Americans that are here. Your immigration department would have that information. I know that they track it regularly. I know that they take their obligation to ensure that foreign nationals, including Americans in Sierra Leone, have the appropriate documentation. But that's something that they do independent from the embassy. So I would not be able to give you an accurate figure, but I'm sure they could.
I know there is always some line of resolve most times when these issues do come up. What do you think is the immediate line of resolve, for particularly so the issue at hand, say, propose visa restrictions on those who've overstayed?
So I think the first emphasis of President Trump's administration is dealing with those who are already illegally in the United States. There is a lot of time, resources, and money being spent to find those individuals and to remove those individuals to their home country. The second emphasis has been, frankly, on our borders. We have serious problems with people who continue to come across our borders without going through the legal immigration process, both at our southern and our northern and along our coasts. So the president has used the full resources of the U.S. government, deployed Department of Defense personnel to help secure those borders, make sure that we don't continue to see gangs moving people through the desert into our country. His third emphasis really is on the whole visa process and making sure that it is as secure as possible, that we know who we're giving visas to, that we are confident in their identity and confident that they are not engaged in illegal activities before we issue visas for them to go to the United States. So that's really where the emphasis is right now.
Ambassador, can you just stay with us? We will go for the second set of messages on our Facebook page, and after these ones, we'll see ways to respond and then wrap up this segment. First off is from Mohammed Kondo, who says, America don't negotiate with terrorists. The terrorists are here, that's why they kick us out. They can't tell you when you ask, ask Mali, Burkina and Niger. Osam Conti says, if Burkina Faso military head of state rejects Donald Trump's invitation, more African leaders go follow suit. Albert Lanston says, can you please kindly ask him if those non-violent criminals, illegal, will be deported despite being protective individuals in the U.S., or is it just the violent illegal criminals who will be deported? Ambassador, any other program to travel to the U.S.? Swamp Prince Suleiman Kavoni says, overstaying shouldn't be a government problem rather than individual issues. Citizens travel to the U.S., to the United States without the knowledge of the government. Musa Songo says, Sahel Union full of badat. Okay. Again, Shekuddin Pakabo says, how about the visa lottery program? Are they also, of course, I think the ambassador has responded to him already. Swamp Prince Suleiman Kavoni says, how can the two countries work towards a resolve overstaying? James Banakagbo says, it's a shame as a country we're always dependent on aid, poor and misdirected leadership since the time immemorial. Vandy Kalon says, this is clear from the ambassador himself that there is no visa restriction or traveling ban on Sahel Leone to the US. But my question to the ambassador is, do you believe the MCC fund is going to be released by President Trump to Sahel Leone? Musdi says South Africa is standing upright with the suffering Palestinian people, and the US does not like that. So obviously South Africa will not be favored much by the West. Musdi also says the US will not publicly disclose or give an account of all citizens living abroad because some of them are their spies. Van Kalon says, this should be a lesson to all African leaders to hold up their responsibility in providing for their citizens. Lastly, is from Osfren Kamau says, main character syndrome versus political rhetorics. Ambassador, you could respond to same these comments from our Facebook page, and then see ways to, of course.
Yeah, so I think we've talked about many of the issues already. Sure. Certainly, as I've said, the visa lottery, at this point, that would require an act of Congress to change. That is in law. I'm not aware that any legislation's been introduced to change that program, so I anticipate that it will continue to operate as it has in the past. As far as the whole question of our disagreements with South Africa, I think the president was very clear in his executive order as to precisely what his concerns are, and it has to do with certain policies related to land expropriation that the South African government has adopted within its own borders, certainly within their ability to change. And that is going to continue to be an impediment until such time as those expropriation policies are dealt with. As far as the whole question of terrorism in the sub-region, yes, there is a serious problem. Certainly in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, we have seen that. That problem continues to move southward towards the coast. We have seen attacks in Togo, we have seen attacks in Benin, we have seen attacks in Cote d'Ivoire. This is something that we obviously take very seriously. I think regional players take very seriously. We have active ongoing cooperation with the coastal West African states, including Sierra Leone, to do everything we can to make sure that the terrorism problem is contained in the Sahel. We would have very much liked to have continued working directly with the Sahelian governments, but they chose to go in a different direction and rely upon others for support. So we are limited as to what we can do directly where the source of the problem is right now. But we will continue to work with Ghana, with Cote d'Ivoire, with Nigeria, with Togo, Benin, Sierra Leone, Liberia, Guinea, to try to make sure that they are not impacted by these violent extremists.
Someone asked a question as to the funds, seen as much as Donald Trump is now president. He believes and he thinks that the ambassador will not come out clear as to the halt of the MCC Compact funding society.
So at this time, the MCC Compact is in force. We have not taken any steps under that compact to terminate the MCC, nor has Sierra Leone. Whether the MCC Compact ultimately enters into force is dependent upon the terms that are in that agreement, which require certain actions on the part of the government of Sierra Leone. I know the government is working very hard to take those actions, so we will continue to monitor those very closely and see whether or not we get to an entry into force place.
Ambassador, it's a pleasure having you in our studios this morning. It's been an intense interview, and I believe the viewers on our Facebook page and even those who are following us from across the looks and kind of Sierra Leone did enjoy the responses from you this morning, quite explicit. We are honored to have you in our studios. Thank you so very much for being here, Ambassador.
Well, thank you. It's always a pleasure to join you.
Thank you.